Welcome to Watching the Throne.
A lyrical analysis of Kanye West.
Can we even say that anymore? My name's Chris Lambert.
A lyrical analysis of Ye. And my name is Travis Bean. And Chris, it's so good to hear your voice.
It's really nice to hear your voice too, Travis.
I thought maybe once you went away to England and came back, you'd come back with a British accent. But it's nice to hear you kept your normal voice.
I started to pick it up a little bit because one night when we were in London, the Browns were playing, right? But we were 6 hours ahead. So I was down in the lobby of the hotel just watching on my phone, streaming it. And there are a bunch of English guys just drinking at the hotel bar and cheering on the football games. Because it turns out that American football is still gaining in popularity.
Yeah.
And eventually at one point, the Browns game was one of the few left on since they were playing the Chargers and it was West Coast, so it started late. And I went over and started watching it on the TV with them. And they're like, "You're a Browns fan. Oh, get this man a drink. Get this bloke a drink." And spent like 45 minutes talking with Stu in particular. And who's
shout out Stu if he's listening.
Yeah, shout out Stu. He's a big Jets fan, so got to see the Jets play for the first time. I was really excited. But in the middle of talking with him, I found myself starting to like slip into like a British, which happened to me when I lived in Australia. I was staying at a hostel and everybody was British, Scottish, Irish, and I started picking up their accents, which can sound insulting when you're starting to talk back and you're like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say it in that way." It's infectious, you know. I have my family's from this area, so I think it's just part of my cellular memory.
Yeah. I totally understand. Every time I watch Austin Powers, I speak British for the next 2 days.
Yeah, exactly.
I love this idea of you like slowly turning British over the course of a vacation, and then by the end of it, the Browns game on, and you're just in the bar going bollocks because the Browns have lost.
Which they did, and it was bollocks.
It was bollocks.
Stupid refs.
Man. Anyway, 24?
24. We're about to spend 24 hours or 24 minutes. Who knows? Somewhere between 24 minutes.
I would think somewhere between
hours.
those two.
Yeah. Discussing this song, which is the track 11 on Donda. So we're almost halfway through, right? 11 of the 23 core songs that make up the album.
So halfway through the next episode, we'll be halfway done with this season.
Yeah, which, how nice.
Although if you include our 2-part Off the Grid episode, we're kind of halfway.
Kind of. But 24 is definitely a refreshing change of pace for the album so far. We've talked about how there was a bit of a harshness to Jail and a bit of darkness to God Breathed and Off the Grid, Hurricane, which then got a little even darker with Praise God, Jonah, Okay, Junior, specifically talking about the production elements, right? There isn't a lot of brightness in the production on these songs. Even if the songs are catchy, even if they have a flow, even if there's some positive energy, thinking specifically about Off the Grid, right? And just kind of the bounciness of that song. Yeah. Or even the confidence and bravado that Kanye has on songs like God Breathed and Jonah and Okay. He's kind of going for it a little bit, right? But we've noted that there seems to be, in Jail, God Breathed, Off the Grid, and Hurricane, kind of an arc of energy with Kanye kind of finding his footing with this album, establishing some themes, some attitudes, and then Praise God, Jonah, Okay, Junior, and Believe What I Say, entering into Kanye's getting a little more combative with people, standing his ground a little bit, addressing Drake is our perspective on a few of those songs specifically, and kind of getting into these tensions that he's starting to have, where you're starting to see Kanye's ego come to the forefront, his pride come to the forefront, and maybe him get a little bit off course in terms of focus. And then Believe What I Say is the first bright song of that group, but is also a very downer
Right.
of a song, as it's Kanye essentially detailing what went wrong in his marriage with Kim and kind of commenting on the family dynamics, and he's getting his say in on the relationship and not necessarily just cowering and being like, I did everything wrong, please forgive me, which is something that on Hurricane he was taking a lot of blame, but now on Believe What I Say he's externalizing some of the blame.
Yeah.
And that kind of crescendos us leading into this next arc of songs from 24, Remote Control, Moon, culminating in Heaven and Hell, that really feels like the first major tipping points on the album. And 24 just really hits us with this energy of saving, redemption, change that carries through into that last arc of Donda, Keep My Spirit Alive, Jesus Lord, New Again. And we'll even see in the middle of this album, or in the middle of this song, piano notes start to come through that seem to foreshadow a little bit come to life.
Yeah. It's just incredible the change that happens here, sonically and lyrically and thematically and all that. You know, like every single song leading up to 24 is there's so much sound. Like, as much as we talk about the album being a little more ambient, like ambient doesn't mean like, you know, quiet and like spacious. An ambient sound really fills the space, and ambient sounds are very complicated. And on top of like those really ambient energies we're getting on stuff like God Breathe and Jonah and Okay, you have really brash drums on Jail. You have like those graveyard sounds and God Breathe. The immense sense of space in Hurricane. Like, there's so much going on sonically in all those that when you get to 24, it's a complete change. Like, it is just organ. Like, it feels like you're standing in a church, like a big spacious church, where the organ is echoing and it's powerful and it's consuming the room. Like, it's something very different. It's a very spare sound compared to what we've had so far, even with the added elements that are in there, and, you know, the choir and the piano and a couple of production elements that they've clearly added. The sound is different. Like, you have a church feel suddenly. Like, that is so far removed from everything we've heard so far.
Which does in some ways also foreshadow, or at least seem to have similar energy to Come to Life, right? Where you literally have the sounds of a church sermon and the church congregation in the background of that song.
Yeah, it's totally a build to that energy. Like, that's why we're in this transition point in the album where we're going away from those harsh and heavy sounds that feel consuming and chaotic and stressful, and switching to a lighter melodic sound, a sound of like ascension, of reaching a new plane and keeping your spirit alive. Like, that's what this middle part of the album is getting towards sonically.
Yeah, and you can see this happening in the music video for 24. It was the latest music video that Kanye released, and it's something that we saw on the during the third listening party, right? You had footage from listening party 2 where Kanye went ascending up, Kanye in quotes, went ascending to the upper reaches of the stadium, which was so dramatic, right? During No Child Left Behind. What a way to end that show. But in the video, that continues. You see Kanye's ascension, and then you end up seeing him just in the sky, floating through the sky all of a sudden. And most of the video is him just floating through the sky, seeing the sun. There's moments where you see this circle that could be the moon, right, with his mom's face superimposed on it. There's moments where he's floating through darkness, which could be argued as floating through space or just floating through this impermanence as he reaches more of the heavenly world of the ether and ether. Mm-hmm. People have pointed out that it also looks very similar to the void space that you get in Get Out, when the main character is taken over and you see him falling into himself, and that's a place he has to climb out of, which feels like a very dark interpretation given how light the rest of the music video is. But one of the interesting things at the end of the music video, and maybe that's a discussion for another time, is that it seems to imply simulation theory is going on, or at least that there are different planes of existence as you see the camera kind of zoom out, and the sky space that Kanye has been occupying is just one kind of flat, two-dimensional plane in the midst of several other flat two-dimensional planes that are in the midst of another sky. So it's almost like a simulated world within the world. And as the camera kind of turns, you lose sight of those dimensions, and you're just left with the sky by itself, which is interesting. Given how much Kanye has commented on simulation stuff and talked about being in video games, yada yada. But I think the major takeaway from it is Kanye with this song is trying to convey this sense of floating upwards, reaching this point of the sky where you feel closer to heaven, closer to God. You get the warmth of the sun and feeling comforted and cared for in the aftermath of maybe being down in the midst of some turmoil and chaos.
Yeah. I like that. I like what you're describing in the video and how he reaches this place of calm where there's really nothing around. It's just like you in the sky. And it kind of reminds me of meditation and getting to this point where like you block everything out and it's just you and God. It's just you trying to reach up to your mom. It's you channeling that energy. And as much as we've talked about meditation on this album, specifically of Donda chant, that's what we thought that chant was really getting at, like blocking everything out and concentrating on your mom, like what's important. There really hasn't been much meditation so far on this album. Like even the songs that are like heavily ambient, like I'm just thinking every time he talks about God, he talks about reaching this new place. That's not necessarily the focus of any of the songs. It's in a lot of lines, it's part of the chorus, but I'm thinking of like even a song like Hurricane, which ideally you think of like the Weeknd's hook and everything, like walking on water and like Father Hold Me Close. Kanye just talks about his life, like here I go with a new chick, still playing after two kids. Like there's a lot of that energy in each song, Kanye reacting to things. That's not really meditation. That's not blocking everything out. 24 is the first song we really see it. This song is about God, about God connecting with God and getting through this moment. Like that to me actually does remind me of the music video in that way, and how it's a reaction to everything we've gotten so far in the album.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. What you're saying is that so far Kanye has been very much, if he's reflective like he is on Hurricane, and thoughtful, right? It's reflective in a positive way. It's still caught up in the mess of things. Like so much of the songs up to this point have been him caught up in whatever is going on, whether that's him talking about like lifestyle stuff on God Breathed and Off the Grid, or what he was doing wrong on Hurricane, or what Kim and her family were doing wrong on Believe What I Say, like conflict with Drake in those middle portions. Kanye has been so focused on the minutia of life rather than getting at some of the broader picture stuff. This is that first song that starts to get at the broader picture, that reduces all of the other things that he's been talking about, and is just kind of getting at the macro rather than the micro.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I feel like I keep realizing anyway. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm going to go into the weeds a little bit. That it's funny because I was listening to Modest Mouse's new album, and Modest Mouse has been one of my favorite bands ever. And all the stuff Isaac Brock is talking about in the album is like, it's like, oh, this feels like stuff I'm going through. And then I start thinking about like, well, I've liked Modest Mouse for like, 15 years now. Like they've kind of been around this whole time, and like I've been able to react to the like music as it comes out, and you see these weird parallels between you and the artist. Like I feel like I'm starting to see that with Kanye quite a bit, and this journey, this struggle to become meditative, to block all that stuff out, to not be consumed by the minutia and all the stuff that doesn't matter, and focus on what's really important. And I feel like everything you're describing, like, that gets at that. Like, this is 24. Like, that's what this song's all about, is finally blocking out all that stuff we heard in the first 10 songs that doesn't really matter. Not that it doesn't matter, but it's not going to necessarily help you reach this next step. It's not going to help you ascend. It's not going to, I don't know. They're like, even thinking about Believe What I Say, like, that song to me sounds bitter. And it reminds me of like bitter moments I've had with my wife, where I know I've let ego taken over and I'm not trying to be understanding. Like that stuff happens to you and you can't ignore it, but like, that's not necessarily the best part of you. Like, the best part of you is a song like Lord, I Need You, where you're reflective and you're empathetic and you're thinking about why things went wrong. Like, there's this balance you need to reach. And I feel like that's what this album's really about, is finding that balance and coming out the other side a better man.
And that's one of the things you talk about. I'm thinking about how Kanye speaks about it in terms of essentially the devil and God, right? Or demons and angels. And not everybody that's going to be listening to this album is religious like myself, but I can still relate to that idea of, like, the negative influences in your life winning over sometimes versus the positive or the enlightened influences and mindsets and perspectives, and just putting your best foot forward rather than your most indulgent foot forward. Or giving into just kind of the temptations or the id rather than the self, right? Or the ego rather than the self. You can start to label these things whatever makes you feel the most comfortable, but essentially it's getting into this idea of the positive, like, views of things versus the negative views of things. And we're finally getting that like wave of positivity coming through the album.
Yeah, gosh, I'm excited about that. Yeah, I just love everything we're talking about. Like, to me, this gets at what I think Kanye's really been building towards album by album, is really holding on to this idea that, like, you can't deny yourself. Like, all this mix of energy we're hearing on the album, like, there's good and there's bad. Like, none of it's really bad, in quotes. Like, it's not. It's all part of who Kanye West is. Sometimes he is egotistical. Sometimes he is antagonistic. Like, he's just human, and he's not afraid to, like, present himself as being human on this album. The point is not to just show yourself in this light, you know, that you're changed. You're honest about yourself, and you show how hard and arduous the journey to finding that change can be. And that's why, like, God, the song's 23 albums, like, holy shit, this is exhausting. But to show that over the course of 23 albums, to spend the first 10 songs of the album really honing in on this idea that, like, there's chaos in your life and it's consuming you, like, that's important for art. Like, it's important that it took us this long to get to 24 to start to see this change start to happen.
Yeah, and that's something that Kanye has talked about at times over the last couple of years. Ever since the Jesus is King period, he started talking about how he had been working for the devil, rapping for the devil. We have this GQ interview that we're going to return to a few times that came out. The interview happened at the end of January 2020, and the interview itself came out in April of 2020. So post Jesus is King, very early in the God's Country Donda process, right? Like, Will Welsh, who wrote the article, talks at one point about hearing an early version of Wash Us in the Blood, right? And new music that Kanye was working on. And when Welsh asks Kanye about, let's talk about the music you're making, Kanye says, I was thinking of not rapping again because I rapped for the devil so long that I didn't even know how to rap for God. Right. So there was already this idea in his mind of rapping for the devil versus rapping for God. He talks about how he used to drink during the day, And he says that he was in his office working on a Couture collection, and there was some Grey Goose in the fridge, and I was just going to get a daytime drink. And I looked and thought, devil, you're not going to beat me today. That one statement is like a tattoo. I haven't had a drink since I realized I needed to take it day by day, but I never owned up or was even told, hey, you're a functioning alcoholic. People have called me crazy, a crazy person. People have called me everything, but not a functioning alcoholic. And I'd be drinking orange juice and Grey Goose in the morning.
Yeah.
But he also said at another point of the interview, he talked about feeling like he could be Clark Kent. Welsh says that the fact that nothing's ever really done slow down the momentum of everything you're creating. And he says time and space are man-made constructs. That's my answer to that question right there. Art never fully explains itself, and art is never fully done. Me being normal, that's not even a true statement. You know what normal is to me? An act. I can act normal, and that's me as Clark Kent. But artists are people who have embraced themselves as a superhero. To which Welsh says, sometimes when I see you refusing to be Clark Kent in certain situations, I'm like, please just be Clark Kent for a minute. It will save you so much trouble, which is, I think, something all of us have felt at one point. I feel like there's a job to be unwilling to make compromise. I like when people don't have to compromise themselves to collaborate. Even as an artist or as a composer, I compose the strongest talents and push them to be the maximum version of their superhero. People spend one day with me and they're thinking about their own ideas outside of the box. If people spend years, they should be able to make it to the Super Bowl. To have blind faith is the ultimate confidence. Sometimes it could have felt like it was arrogance. And I think that the arrogance could have come from the fact I wasn't working for God, but I was working for my ego, which is like working for the devil. So I think Kanye's balancing some of those things here. This idea of ego versus letting go of ego, this idea of devil versus God. We've seen how many times on this album already people have talked about demons and angels, devil and God. And it comes up here again while also crescendoing several songs from now on Heaven and Hell. So I feel like Kanye in these interviews, if you start going back to his 2019, 2020, I don't think there's a 2021 interview, right? You'll hear Kanye kind of talk about that dichotomy a lot. And we've talked a lot about how Kanye albums tend to reflect the period of his life. Don't even tend to. They are reflections of that period of his life. So it makes sense to me that he's just kind of channeling that energy, not just on the song, but on this album, where you're having a lot of that confrontation of self and trying to see which energy is going to win out, which is a similar thing that we mentioned on Jesus is King when we did that season.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's not surprising at all. Like Kanye's connection with God, it's not like God standing there, like any human standing there. Like it's a spiritual connection. It's something that comes from within. You really can't do that until you've fixed yourself mentally and spiritually. Like you have to push yourself to that point, and that's a complete battle of yourself.
Yeah. And you have pointed out several times that you don't think it's as simple as doing things wrong and then doing things right. Mm-hmm. That there are times where Kanye feels justified in some of the intention and the anger, like thinking about Selah, right? Or Selah, right. Or
spiritual
Closed
warfare.
On Sunday, spiritual warfare, very much that. And even some of the attitudes he's taking and the early portions of this album where it seems he's standing up for himself, and you could view it as combative in a negative way. But even in this interview, Kanye says, I feel that we all have sin, and when certain sins are worn more on our sleeves, it's easier for Christians who are not Christ but are human beings to be able to channel judgment at what they see in front of them, which I think one of the key things there is that we all have sin and certain sins are worn on our sleeves. I feel like there are some sins being worn on sleeves here. Yeah. But the other thing is, if anyone claims to be Christian, they're accepting accountability to other Christians, but people don't realize that Christians are loud, that we have a right to righteous anger, that Jesus flipped tables. They think that all of a sudden you believe in Christ, so we're not even supposed to speak up. And if we speak up, people will say, oh, you're being judgmental. And it's like, oh, now because I'm a Christian, I don't even have an opinion anymore. I'm a Christian, I still have an opinion, but my opinion is based on the word. So Kanye does take a stance there of you're allowed to have an opinion, you're allowed to get upset about things, you're allowed to flip tables. So not every like table flip in quotes moments where you're emotional is necessarily a negative thing, But I do think if you chain enough of those together over time, you can see someone that's maybe gotten distracted by some things.
Yeah, it's funny because like that to me does sound like Kanye for a lot of his life. Like he was just in antagonistic mode for a while. He was pushing buttons. He just seems different to me than he seems now. Like he still has that energy. He's still Kanye West, and I think that's really important for Kanye. Like, don't deny yourself. Denying yourself is the worst thing you could do as a Christian. Like, you just have to find that balance. And I think that's what you're describing, is that, you know, you can still have those moments where you flip tables, where you push buttons, where you go outside of what's expected, but you also do it with God in mind. You do it by the word of God. Like you're part of a bigger fight than yourself. Like you're doing something you believe is going to create good change in the world. So that's where it's kind of hard to see where Kanye's coming from, because you read the energy of something like Off the Grid or the energy of Believe What I Say, and it's hard to attach yourself to somebody like that. But you just also remember, like, that's part of being human. Like, that's something Kanye's struggling with, and like that's something he can overcome. Like, you could still go through those motions because you are being yourself. Like, that's how you naturally are. But then what's on the other side of that? Like, how do you grow from that? How do you reflect on that? How do you meditate on that? That's, I think, of what a lot of the album's getting at.
Which is something we talked about in the Ye and Kids See Ghosts seasons, is that the first 3 songs on each of those albums get at darker thoughts and darker actions. And they're not, I mean, they're a little more on the wrong side in that album, right? Like the intensity of I Thought About Killing You, the intensity of Yikes, and then All Mine just being straight up like straight arrogance. And then you think about some of the goofiness of Fire and what's the song after Fire?
Fourth Dimension.
Is it Fourth Dimension? Is it? Oh yeah, I'm thinking of the sample on Fire. Then Fourth Dimension, where they're a little less thoughtful, Kanye and Cudi, than they are on the last 3 songs, right? Reborn, Kids See Ghosts, Cudi Montage. There's a huge difference in how they're approaching things and viewing things. But one of the key takeaways on both of those albums is that you can't fault yourself, or you shouldn't guilt yourself into, you need to accept that those are part of the process and part of the journey, right? So Kanye realizes on Ye that the dark thoughts, the dark experiences, the mistakes that he makes lead to the breakthroughs, which is something that he talked about with T.I. at the end of the year when T.I. flew out to talk with Kanye because T.I. was so upset about the Trump stuff. There's that interview where they're going back and forth, and Kanye talks about how when he says something out loud and gets the response from it, it's like the pressure that creates a diamond. It hones you, it helps refine your thinking, you get course corrected very quickly by the public. And that course correction can be that you double down on how you're feeling, like you feel even more strongly about it, or you feel like, oh no, I learned something. Like, people taught me all of these things, even if they were critical and mean about some of it, like you still learn. And I think I lost track of my point, but
happens a lot in this show.
Yeah, there was something to that idea that Kanye was balancing on those albums, that he is aware of the fact that the negative aspects lead to breakthroughs and lead to positivity. And even on Kids See Ghost, you have the moments where you are going to step back at times. You're going to slide backwards. The negativity, the darker emotions are going to come up at times, but you just have to keep moving forward, right? That's what the last portion of Reborn gets at, is the dark thoughts returning, the storm returning, but you keep moving forward and you get out of it. So I feel like we're seeing Kanye continuing to channel that energy and really come to terms with all of that on Jesus is King, and now here, where he's refining the fact that there are these initial ways of reacting to things and then improved ways of reacting to things, which you look at how he's talking to Drake in the early portion of this album versus how he's responding on Pure Souls. You look at how he's talking to Kim in the early portions of this album and reflecting on the relationship to how he reflects on it in Lord, I Need You and Come to Life. And there's just these differences, but that's because the second portion of this album is Kanye growing from the first portion of this album.
Yeah. I like that idea that it's basically like it's a similar journey as Ye and Kids See Ghosts, except it's 3 times as long.
Yes. And we will at some point get used to just saying yay, but right now we've been saying Kanye for so long, you know?
Yay, yay, yay. I can do it.
Yay. Yay chant. Whew. All right. So the last, maybe we can save it for the start of the first verse.
Okay.
But the song's called 24. I mean, I guess it makes sense to talk about it now then.
Sure.
The Kobe connection.
Yeah.
So what? We get 24. 24 was Kobe Bryant's number. We know that Kanye and Kobe were friends back in 2000. What was it? 2009 was the commercials. 2010, 11.
Oh,
he did the commercials with Kobe when Kobe was premiering some new shoes. And you had first the Mamba system where Kanye's in the crowd and Kobe tells him, like, you need to be a different beast but the same animal. And Kanye kind of looks at him and is like, what the fuck does that mean, Kobe Bryant?
Yeah.
Such a good commercial. And then there was the one where Kobe's kind of a movie hero and Kanye plays the action movie villain, coming in on a helicopter in that video of all things. But
which convinced me he needs to be a villain in the Fast and Furious movies.
Kanye being a villain in the Fast and Furious movies would be dynamite.
I don't think I would recover from that. Like, no joke. Don't think I could recover from that.
No, that would be like a crashing together of your two worlds that would just...
The show would end. I would be in a comatose state.
Yeah, it would break your brain. Absolutely.
It can't get better than this, so I'm just going to exit this realm.
Reminds me of Infinite Jest. People watch a movie and like lose their mind because of just some techniques in the movie. That would be what happens to you.
Yep, exactly.
But they had that connection. They were working together. They were close over the years in terms of Kanye going to games, like putting out merch that was Kobe related in that 2016 period. Kanye was at Kobe's last game at the Staples Center. And he felt very connected to Kobe in a lot of ways. And even in this GQ interview, it comes up because, you know, it was January 29th, 2020, which was, as Will Welsh notes, 72 hours after Bryant's passing. So the article actually starts with Welsh writing, when Kanye West shows up for breakfast in the central cabin at the ranch he recently bought near Cody, I ask how he's doing. Not good, he says, turning to look at me. Not good, how come? Because, he says, Kobe was one of my best friends. Of course, it's the morning of January 29th, 72 hours after Bryant's shocking death. Somehow in my head, being out here under the limitless, unfamiliar sky and rocky alien tundra has made the already unimaginable Kobe tragedy seem even less real. Still, it was a thoughtless question. I have known West since 2003 and have stayed in intermittent contact with him over the years, but it feels like an inauspicious start to what will become an intense series of experiences and conversations across 5 weeks and 3 countries. And then later on in the interview, a couple days later, Kanye says, one thing I thought was really amazing is that we were able to find a groove with the photographs today, even as out of it as I was with the loss of Kobe. We were able to just go to the court and play ball. There's one street I drive to go to from either my office or my home to the property where the domes were built. And the editor note is, the street is Los Virgenes, I don't know how to say it, Road, the site of the helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant and 8 other people just 4 days prior. So now there's no way for me to not be as determined as Kobe every time I drive down that street. It's game time. There's no more that we can't make. There's no move that we can't make or that we'll wait to make. Everyone in our life is now a member of the Lakers on one of Kobe's championship teams. The way that Kobe would say that we all have to come together and win this championship is the way that I look at life now, to an infinite other level. So, oh yeah, this is a game changer for me. He was the basketball version of me, and I was the rap version of him. And that's facts. We got the commercials that prove it. No one else can say this. We came up at the same time together, and now it's like, yeah, I might have had a reputation for screaming about things, but I'm not taking any mess for an answer now. We're about to build a paradigm shift for humanity. We ain't playing with them. We bringing home the trophies. So despite how sad Kanye was, he was still very motivated in the wake of Kobe's passing to like honor Kobe, to live by the determination that Kobe had, which is pretty awesome. But I thought it was an interesting note that he talks about how he doesn't feel good at the very beginning and as out of it as I was with the loss of Kobe. And the first verse is exhausted, never the right time to go. It just seems like, yeah, Kanye was feeling out of it. He was feeling tired from that loss. And he translates that to the very beginning of the song with exhausted, never the right time to go, never the right time to go. And starting to zoom out a little bit through the loss of Kobe and start to get at much broader topics and motivations, which is exactly like, he's not as specific in the song as he is in this interview with talking about there's no move that we can't make or that we'll wait to make. Right. But you can extrapolate that attitude into where Kanye gets to with like, you know, you're alive and God's not finished. We gotta be okay. Like, it's going to be all right. There's all this positive energy that's stemming from this initial sense of exhaustion and loss.
Yeah, it's such a perfect fit on this album too, because, you know, when I first heard 24, I didn't realize it was about Kobe Bryant. And you think about these lines, like never the right time to go, and the album's called Donda, like in my head, like this song is about Donda, dealing with the loss of Donda. And not that the song isn't necessarily dealing with that. I just like now that it's more complicated than that. And this is, again, like I feel like song by song I'm realizing this about myself, that I kind of reduced the album Donda down a little bit, that I kind of oversimplified what it was about. And it's not just about Donda, it's about who you are. Like, it's about who Donda made. Like, it's way bigger and impossible to define. Like, it's so beyond like what a simple statement could contextualize this album as. And 24, I think, is like this moment where I'm like realizing once again, like how much bigger this album is than just a single thing. And that as Kanye's on this song reflecting on losing Kobe Bryant, he's also reflecting on himself. Like, these thoughts also pertain to his mom and how she sees him down on earth and how he's fulfilling the word of God. Like, all of that is really tied up at once. And it's just that the impetus of it is Kobe Bryant. Like, in the passing of Kobe Bryant led to all of these thoughts and this outpouring of emotion and art. And so every sound you hear on this song, like, is getting at that. Like, it's part of, again, like everything we've talked about, it's part of the journey of this album, the journey of Kanye West that we're seeing over the course of this album, him really working on himself mentally and spiritually and opening up. And by the end, you know, No Child Left Behind, like reaching this point that Donda could be proud of, that, you know, being born new again and living life as like, in a way Donda would be proud of. I just love that 24 is such a part of that, and that we can now tie it to Kobe Bryant, somebody he cared so deeply about. And as you're reading from the interview, like somebody who stirred up a lot of thoughts and motivation, like there's suddenly such a drive and force to the song in a way that I did not have before.
In what you were talking about, saying that you were realizing the album was deeper than what you had initially thought, and especially in response to the idea of Donda, right? That seemed to be an initial whiplash for some people that thought that since the album was called Donda, it was going to focus a lot more on her passing.
Right.
And that more of the songs were going to be about the loss and the grief and coming to terms with the loss, and essentially that we might be getting like an 808s and Heartbreak that wasn't about the ending of his relationship with Alexis Pfeiffer, but was about his mom's passing. And then a lot of the album doesn't deal with that. You get a bit of it on Jesus Lord, and you get call outs to Donda at times, but it's not like most of the album is dealing with that subject matter. It's not an album that's really focused on the past or even the sense of present loss. And I think what really made that pivot for you was when we were talking about Jonah, or Praise God, and we got to some of the first quotes from Donda,
right,
and looking ahead to the speech that she has on Donda, right? Mm-hmm. And her saying why Kanye's not afraid. And those lines in particular, I remember you telling me stood out to you as like, oh, this is about what makes Kanye Kanye. This is about Kanye discovering something about himself through remembering Donda's words, through remembering who his mom like helped shape him to be. And I think that connects to what you're saying with 24, and that we see that the song is inspired by Kobe, especially with the number, even though Kobe's not showing up in the music video, right? Donda is showing up in the music video. It gets back to the same thing. These people that have passed away, the loss can be like a huge burden on you, or it could be something that is inspiring in the sense that you want to continue, as you said, to make them proud. That was the emotion I had when my dad passed. That was the emotion I had when my mom passed. It wasn't this supreme weight of grief. It was this uplifting sense of, watch what I'm going to do because I'm part of you. Yeah. And I'm inspired by you, and I'm going to pick up this torch and carry ahead. And that does seem to be the energy here, right? Like, I'm going to carry ahead. I'm not going to be, I could be burdened by these negative emotions, but I'm not going to be. And then in terms of like more specific stuff about Kobe, Tony Williams, Travis found this tweet from West Sub Ever from September 11th, 2020. Tony Williams, Kanye's cousin, the world famous Tony Williams, who has been part of every Kanye album in some capacity, said that has just posted a video on his Instagram of Sunday Service singing 24 off the Donda track list. He also confirmed it to be about Kobe Bryant with the hashtag Mamba in the caption. So Tony ended up deleting that post, and it's possible he deleted it since he just didn't want the music to be out there, right? Like Kanye's like, hey, take that down.
Yeah.
It's possible he deleted it because, you know, tying it to Kobe was a step too far. I don't know. But he at least thought at the time, like, okay, this is in honor of Kobe. And we know how much Kobe's death meant to Kanye. So just the idea of a song called 24, it's hard not to think in terms of Kobe Bryant.
Totally. Yeah. And just one last day, and God, we're getting real reflective on this episode. I feel like what we're describing with living up to your parents' legacy and everything, and or continuing their legacy, or even realizing like the way they shaped you, like that's something that actually that takes a while. That's something you don't even like realize for a while. Like even if Kanye's mom was still alive and he was reflecting on like everything she had taught him, like you don't realize so many things about yourself and the way your parents have shaped you over the years until later in life. I mean, I've personally realized, like, I feel like that's what therapy's for, is for you to realize, like, oh, that's why I do that. Like, that's such a huge thing. And especially now, this album, with Donda being gone, like, Kanye can't necessarily, like, talk to her and figure things out. All he can do is reflect. And again, that's a journey we're seeing on this album. Like, is Kanye finding that spiritual connection with his mom and manifesting that connection in a way he can't physically manifest it, and really reflecting on himself and saying, like, am I carrying on her legacy? And that's the point, I think, of us hearing her voice and hearing her say these things about Kanye. Is Kanye studying himself, which you have to do. Like, you have to take these looks at yourself and understand yourself in a way no one else in the world could, and you haven't even for a long time. It's it's a very heavy journey that Kanye's, showcasing here in the form of art.
Yes. Very much art. You would call this art?
I would call it beautiful art.
All right. So lyrics?
Yeah.
All right. We get Sunday service choirs starting out, which we had only heard the choir at this point on Hurricane, right?
Gosh, I would have to think about that. Like, there's certainly been choirs, like there's been background vocals, but you're right, like a full-on choir, that might have been the only one.
And there it's really only with a word.
Yeah.
So having the choir kind of finally come in full, it kind of pays off. Especially, you talked earlier about Hurricane. You're getting the hints of like, God hold me close, but then the idea of, oh, don't let me drown.
Yeah.
There's still some of the fear and negativity, and here all of that's kind of gone as you're embracing the fact of just the godliness is all around you.
Yeah.
So you get the choir saying, "Dear God, make it all right. Only you can make it all right. Dear Lord, make it all right." And just this prayer itself, I know there are people that might be thinking like, oh, the early part of the album, is it really negative? Is there really setting up something problematic in that first part? Like, what's going on? And I think this kind of confirms, even if you don't agree with the specificity of the issues that we think are present in this first arc of the album, the fact that we have a song saying, make it all right, you can make it all right, is pointing to the fact that there's some kind of problem. Things aren't all right.
Right.
And Ye is finally at a point where he's expressing through the choir, please make it all right. Like, something is off despite the confidence I had and God breathed on this and off the grid. Like,
Totally.
I need help.
I feel like that's such a huge part of this middle part of the album. And I think we've talked about it a bit because we've seen some language go in this direction. But thinking about the way, Cudi talks about angels on Moon and talking about being this lonely moment and not knowing if things are going to get better. Like, there's that sense to this part of the album where as you're giving yourself over, and that's, I think, the removal of the ego is not just like, oh, everything's going to be fine. Like, if I just act this way, like, I can fix anything, to realizing that you really do need to relinquish a lot of control to God and that you can't control everything and things are out of your control. And that's part of the beauty of life, that things are out of your control. And in those moments, you're going to feel down. You're going to feel lost and hopeless. But if you believe in God, like, if you keep moving forward, like, that's how you get to the other side. I love that energy in this part of the album. And I mean, what a transition from, all of the ego of the first 10 songs to then come to this idea that you are a little helpless. Like, you are nothing compared to God. Like, you have such little control over these things in a way you don't understand. I don't know. It's that change in tone and energy is so striking and meaningful as we head into this part of the album and head towards that final part of the album where, Kanye does realize that it's just part of life and that he does need to give up that ego.
Yeah. And he even says nothing else ever feels right, which this idea of when I try and do things in other ways, it's just never
I know that
feels
feeling,
as right as it should. Yeah. Right. You kind of get in some mindsets where you're like, oh, I'm gonna, I don't know. I feel like we've just all had periods where we convince ourselves that a certain behavior is the way to go. And you're like, that didn't feel right. Like, that's away from like me and who I am.
Right. Yeah. I feel like it's whatever I create, like a means to an end for something. Like, if I make something my goal, like the end of a journey is something I don't really care about. Like, if it's just, like improving my time in the mile, or if it's just like collecting as many movies as I can, like that kind of stuff that doesn't mean anything. Like, what's really important is like how that stuff makes you feel and what place it sends you to. And if you're growing as a human being, like, as long as you're focusing on that stuff, like, everything starts to feel right. And I feel like that's what probably Kanye's getting at here is, he's pretty antagonistic on the first part of the album, and that some of that energy is okay, but is it putting you in the right place? Like, do you feel good in these moments? Like, are you achieving something greater or more profound? It's probably not always the case.
No, I would imagine not, which then leads to the first verse where Kanye says, exhausted, never the right time to go, which, as we said, recalls how he was feeling in the wake of Kobe's death. Just really out of it, really drained, and just thinking, if Kobe went now or went later, it's just never the right time. If his mom went when she did, went later, it's always going to hurt. It's always going to be tiring. There's never the right time to lose anyone else, and there's never a right time for you to leave. But he goes back to this idea that God loves you. Love when he chooses your steps. And I think that comes to this idea that you just have to trust in God and the love that God has. And when he chooses your steps, when he decides where you need to go in this life, right? Whether it's, a new job somewhere else, or whether it's like something a lot more fateful, but he transitions that to got to make it right before you left, which you got to make things okay before you leave is kind of the idea. But also, you got to make things, getting into the dichotomies of the directions, right? Like, you have to choose between going right or left, but he makes it both. You got to go right before you go left. But I think the greater thing here is just this idea of make things okay in your life before you leave this life.
Yeah, I like the use of left here, like, to take it even one step further. And this is more hypothesizing. I don't know if Kanye would ever means anything like this, but the idea, like the sort of grammatically correct phrase is got to make it right before you leave. But this idea that you got to make it right before you left, like, you got to make it right, but this person is already gone. It to me, it conveys this idea of, like, they're not really gone. Like, they're there, and you still do have time to make it right. Like, you still can channel their legacy, channel them here on earth. Like, I feel like that line could be getting at that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it carries, go ahead.
Well, no, keep going.
Okay. Which carries through to this, what he says next, right? Everybody want to feel like everything going to be all right, or everything going to be right. So it's like, people want to feel like they can get closure. People want to feel like things will be, good after they leave, that things will be good when they leave, that things, even in the aftermath of somebody passing away, will be okay. There's just this desire and sense for closure, which Kanye, I think, through this song, it gets at what you were just saying, is saying that, yes, that closure will be attained. Like, that the people that you leave behind will find closure, that the things that you leave that maybe won't be addressed will get addressed, and that you will find closure when you lose someone.
Yeah. And you'll find closure by giving yourself over to God, by kind of taking yourself out of it a little bit, and not trying to determine your direction, and kind of just understanding the way things are. I feel like Kanye really gets at that because he changes the line from the original Sunday Service song 24, where they say choose puddles. I don't know why they say choose puddles, but then they say be careful when you choose your steps. And Kanye says love when he chooses your steps. And I think it gets away from this idea of, like, be careful how you move here on earth. Like, you need to stay in line with the word of God, to, like, God chooses my steps. Like, God is guiding me in the right direction. He's taking me to this better place I know I need to get to.
I think the choose puddles would kind of be, it says standing my ground won't break my mood. Choose puddles, be careful when you choose your steps. It might be this idea that you need to, like, splash in the puddle, right? Like, don't play it safe and avoid the puddles. Like, step right into the puddle and, like, learn from it, grow from it. Could be getting at any of that.
I am always scared to step in a puddle. It could be like 10 feet deep.
Right. Don't be fearful. Be confident. Step in the puddle. So everybody want to feel like everything gonna be right. New me over the old me, which is an interesting statement. We know that later on this album, we have a song called New Again. It feels like there's a buildup to this idea of rebirth, which is a huge part of the Bible. When we did our Jesus is King season, it was the first time I'd really engaged with the Bible. And so many chapters in the New Testament deal with Jesus promising rebirth and to conquer death and to be reborn. It's a whole concept of baptism, right? Is that you're being reborn. There's this idea of coming back to life, which is something that Kanye already has talked about multiple times. I think God Breathed mentioned it. Praise God mentions it. We have something here like New Again. I think maybe Heaven and Hell mentions something, but then you have Come to Life, which really pays off on not only the biblical elements of this album, but also just on some of the thematic elements of this album. But New Again is very much a moment of rebirth in terms of Kanye's attitude, in terms of his approach to things on this album. So when he has a line that says new me over the old me, it just feels one of those moments of foreshadowing where you could even view this part of the album as the old him, right? Mm-hmm. And he's saying, I need to embrace that new me, that rebirthed me, that baptized me, which this song is really the start of that baptismal that takes place on this album, the same way that Everything We Need and Water were the baptism on Jesus is King.
Yeah. I love how this line, it like, as I'm reading through the lyrics, like it feels like it comes out of left field because it's not necessarily tied to the lines around it. But that's right. Part of why I love this verse is that the whole verse is kind of like that. It's kind of running through a lot of thoughts, like starting with exhausted, like setting kind of like the scene here of like how you feel in your human body. And then just like all of these sayings you need to realize and reflect on. Like it's never the right time to go. Like God is choosing your steps. You can make things right. And so this new me over the old me comes in, and it's just another one of those successive thoughts of Kanye just realizing that, like, embrace who you are, like recognize that you have made change, you're getting better, like you're on a journey, and what's happened to Kobe Bryant, like that's part of that journey.
Yeah, it seems to get, you're right, it does feel, that was one of my initial thoughts as soon as we were talking about the line, like it does come out of nowhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But with this idea of like making it all right, making it right in the aftermath of being in this place of pain, you are kind of remade. You are new. You are redefined by that experience. We heard it in the interview, right?
Right.
Kanye talks about Kobe's passing and says that it changed how he's approaching things. It changed his mindsets. There's a new him in the aftermath of that loss, just like there was a new him in the aftermath of losing Donda. Just like there was a new me in the aftermath of losing my dad, and then another new me after losing my mom.
Yeah.
And then I think even with the idea of got to make it right before you left, like after you make something right, that's a new you as well. You get closure and you start a new chapter. So,
and it's paying off on Praise God and Baby Keem talking about, make it right, let's get right, like you correcting things,
Yeah, that's an underrated part. We talked about it then, that seemed very much foreshadowing for what we were going to see in this next portion of the album, that Keem is setting the stage and the fact that things aren't right, but they will get right. And now here we're having more of a payoff on that, where Kanye is the one saying like, all right, I need to get right. Like this is happening right now. Things are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then also maybe a little nod to the I Love Kanye, right? I miss the old Kanye, straight from the go Kanye, chop up the soul Kanye. I hate the new Kanye, the bad mood Kanye.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he's really been talking about that for a bit. I mean, specifically, obviously, on I Love Kanye, but you think about the entirety of the life of Pablo, it's about becoming someone new, and pretty much every album since then has had that energy.
Yeah, like I remember early on in the podcast, I don't even think the episodes exist anymore, but we were talking about the idea that, each Kanye album, he doesn't really revisit the same topics. They're always new. And at the time, that was the case, right?
Yes,
Like
right.
late registration's a very different journey than college dropouts, and graduation is very different from either of those. My beautiful 808s and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy are very unique. Yeezus as well. By the time The Life of Pablo came out, that was also a very different journey than what Kanye had gone on. But since that album, like, Yay, Kids See Ghosts, Jesus is King, and now Donda all kind of do the same thing. Kanye's really on this idea of transformation, and the dark thoughts and the like bright thoughts that come out of it.
Yes.
And
right.
that dichotomy, he's really been exploring that topic in a much more singular way than he ever had in the past, because it feels like something that he's still currently like working through and dealing with.
Yeah, totally. It's just reflective of himself right now. Like he's still on that journey.
Mm-hmm. So, new me over the old me, let it out, let it all out. God, please set it all right. Make it right. Now that feels right.
Just hearing
nothing
all
else
this in my
ever
head and
feels
just
right.
like,
Yeah. Hands up in the sky.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, but make it right, and now that feels right. Like now that feels right. It's being associated with God, like taking action or feeling that connection with God. You're finally having a little bit of relief there, rather than saying like, please make it right. Nothing feels right. You just have that brief moment of like, now that feels right. Like that first sip of Sprite, you know?
Yeah. Ooh, can it be Diet Sprite? I'm on a diet.
Sure, man. Sure. And then the chorus comes back in, save me. Yeah, make it all right. Like save me's a big phrase, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a difference between like make it right, and like save me, which kind of calls back to some of the hurricane lingo, right? Like don't let me drown, like save me, like
yeah,
please. Bow our heads because it's all right. 24 hours, 24 candles, 24 hours. I mean, I don't know how much the 24 hours has to do with anything. I mean, you could start to say that it's something about like each day's 24 hours. So it's just this idea of like day by day, you have to take it. 24 candles. People were putting out candles in the aftermath of Kobe's passing, like in the shape of the number 24, which was Kobe's basketball number. You could think about putting up and just burning 24 candles in your home to honor Kobe kind of thing. It just seems to be getting at this idea of mourning and prayer.
Yeah. I really love these lines that they don't really, they're so vague that they could, I mean, everything you described, it could mean all those things. It could mean so many other things. Yeah. Like the idea that, you know, Kobe Bryant's number was 24 and there are 24 hours a day. And this idea that like he's still there throughout all hours of the day. Or the way I had read it, the way I think you were kind of getting at is you think 24 hours, like time keeps passing and that number 24 reminds you of Kobe and like each day, like he's not there and you have to keep moving forward. And there just being like 24 candles in the middle of that, like these 24 candles burn that like represent his energy as these days keep passing by. And on top of that, the only really added element to the song production wise on top of the organ, which is immaculate, and the piano, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is there's this kind of ticking sound that goes on through the whole song. And I listened to it a bunch because I didn't want to sound crazy at the show and pitch something completely wild, but to me it sounds like a clock. It sounds like a musical version of a clock they made where there's like this tick tick tick, and it comes in and out of the song. And I feel like that's kind of matching the energy here of them saying 24 hours, this idea that time does keep passing and you keep moving forward.
You know what's something that we hadn't talked about? When the choir is performing, you hear somebody just kind of yelling in the background.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
There's that single voice. It's just like, yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like it gets cut off at some points. When you're mentioning earlier about feeling like this church atmosphere, that's what it made me think of. Somebody like crying out in the congregation,
That's
just
what I
moved
thought
by
too.
the spirits, which then also calls back to Come to Life, where you actually have the church service going on and can hear the congregation. It also made me think about the screams that we had in God Breathed, which I don't think I'm ready to make any kind of claim about, like, oh, the scream on God Breathed is like a different kind of scream than the energy that we hear on 24. But there was at least some similarity to me.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I also, the 24 candle, you just think about the idea of like a candle representing an hour and each hour kind of burning away.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And this idea that we all are essentially a candle, and we burn until we burn out. So,
Wow. Yeah.
throw our hands up to the sky, in the sky. Yes, Lord, we put them high, just kind of honoring God and praying for, closure, praying for healing. And then you get that breakthrough, right? So it's like on the chorus, you get Save Me. There's something with like the energy of Kobe and like honoring Kobe, this idea of like praising and praying enough to where Kanye now has this breakthrough, right? Yeah, know you're alive and God's not finished. With him switching to the second person here, it feels very much that he's talking to the listener. You could also say that he's talking to himself, right?
Right.
In the same way that we all kind of talk to ourselves, like, yeah, know that you're alive and that God's not finished. It's that self-talk, but it also does feel like Kanye trying to, encourage all of us and remind all of us that know you're alive and God's not finished. Like, if you're going through a difficult time because you lost someone else or just life hasn't gone the way that you want, like, God's not finished with you. Give yourself time. Like, you're still alive. You got this.
Yeah. I also thought to throw one more in there, that since the song's about Kobe and this album's, about the spirit of Donda, and it just made me think of this idea that he could be speaking to them. Like, know you're alive, that, your legacy, your presence is still here on earth and God's not finished. Like, it's just this eternal thing and we got to keep fighting from generation to generation.
Right. He's kind of just channeling at that point the idea of like what Kobe would be saying, what Donda would be saying.
Yes.
And that idea of God's not finished, which this could be a stretch or reach, but it is quite the coincidence if so. But in 2009, during the NBA Finals, or maybe it was 2010 NBA Finals, whatever, 2009, we'll just say that, NBA Finals. Yes, because I was in college. I was in my last year of college when the Magic beat the Cavs, which was just depressing.
You're really dating yourself. People can figure out how old you are now.
I know. Yeah. 2009, baby. And then I wanted the Magic to lose so badly. That chump Dwight Howard beating us. Somebody's just walking through my yard. But Kobe, when the Lakers were up 2-0 on the Magic, there was a post-game press conference where one of the reporters goes, Kobe, you're up 2-0, but you don't seem happy. You're not smiling.
This guy sounds terrible.
It seems like you're actually kind of mad. And Kobe just kind of very serious is like, job's not finished. Like, the job's not finished. Like, it's only 2 wins. Job's not finished. So that became a little bit of not a meme, but it was very quotable for a period, right? Just this idea of like, job's not finished. And that's such a Kobe Bryant thing to say.
Yeah, right.
Right? You're up 2 games, like, you're feeling confident, you have the better team, but no, job's not finished. I'm going to stay focused as can be until the job's finished. And if Kanye is channeling Kobe on this song, him taking that idea of job's not finished and making it God's not finished just feels like a very Kanye thing to do. Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was right to say that, like, he's the rap version of Kobe. Like, they definitely share that energy.
Yeah, right. So, Like, know you're alive and God's not finished. I know you're alive. God's not finished. I know you're alive, which that gets at what you're saying, right? That there's something to that. I know you're alive that feels like it could still be channeling this idea that like Kobe's here with you.
Yes.
Donda's here with you. The spirit's not gone.
Yes.
Like God's not finished with your message and your journey, which might also be why this album's called Donda.
Right.
Like, it's to say that Donda's still present and she's still inspiring and influencing. So again, not about grief and Kanye's grief over losing Donda, but the idea that her presence and her energy continues to live on and motivate people and be a like touchstone in this world.
I completely agree. I think that's what makes this album transcendent and more than, again, like the simple view you can have of something like this. Like it's really about, it's beyond grief. Like it's everything you just said. It's about like helping Donda live on. Like your body doesn't, you don't die when your physical body dies. Like everything you've ever done in this earth affects someone else, and if that someone affects someone else, like it's just this thing that it's so much bigger than yourself and something you really have to come to terms with at some point. And you know, describing that on an album and relaying that energy, like that's not easy to do, and I think Kanye has done it.
I think so too. I think so too. So then we get I Know You're Alive and God's Not, and he kind of cuts himself off and then transitions to Genius has it, the devil's a lie, but now he finished. I'm pretty sure listening to it over and over again, he says the devil's alive, but now he finished.
Yeah.
So like the devil is a thing that's very present and exists, because Kanye in all these interviews has talked about working for the devil and feeling the temptation of the devil. So for him to just say the devil's a lie outright, like I don't think he feels like the devil's a lie. I think he feels like the devil's a liar. But this idea of like the devil's alive, but now he's finished. Like I was interacting with the devil was interacting with me, but now he's done. Like God is taking over my life. God's saving me from all of the influence that the devil has had in my life to this point, or on the album to this point. And yeah, now the devil's a lie. Like he's a lie to me at this point, since I'm now being carried by God, since I'm now infused by God.
Yeah.
And we get even a matching cutoff, right? With I Know You're Alive and God's Not to Devil's a Lie and now he fin. Devil's a Lie and now he finished. So you get like a nice little parallel construction with I Know You're Alive, God's Not finished, and Devil's alive, a lie, and now he finished.
Yeah, right.
God's not finished, devil is finished. And that also plays into Heaven and Hell, where Kanye just kind of really feels very empowered, like in a way for the first time on the album that feels very like pure and climactic. And that song, he very much puts the devil in place.
Right.
So then we get Throw Our Hands Up in the Sky coming back in, which kind of feels like the counter energy to the devil, right? You're praising. Yes, Lord, we wave 'em high. So you get a little bit of continuity from the end of the previous chorus to the end of this verse, with the whole denial of the devil being caught up in that energy of putting the hands to the sky and kind of exercising the devil.
Yes, absolutely.
And then that's when we finally get, right? We Gonna Be Okay.
Yeah.
Like once you like let yourself give over to God, once you've accepted that God's not finished and that you're alive, that the devil's like done, you're worshiping, we gonna be okay. We gonna be okay. We gonna be okay.
The first time you've believed that feeling on the album so far.
Mm-hmm. Like, it's very emotional. It's very cathartic. I think it's built up to in a way that whether people realize it or not, it's what makes this song so powerful.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah. Like I think I had kind of missed it a little bit the first few times I listened to the album, because unfortunately the curse of doing this show is I have my analytical brain on a lot. But you're totally right. Like to think that kind of the whole album is a build to this moment of We Gonna Be Okay. Like, it's the first time you hear a sentiment like that and believe it. Like, it's the first hopeful moment I have for Kanye on the album, where I can see that he's finally being groomed to go on this journey, to be in the right place, to even become better, to just say We're Gonna Be Okay over and over with just that organ there. I mean, it's so uplifting and powerful.
Yeah. And people on Genius pointed out, and I might have been a little dismissive of it at first and then dug into it a little bit more, and I feel at least convinced enough that we should bring it up. This idea of We Gonna Be Okay is playing off of All Right by Kendrick Lamar from To Pimp a Butterfly. So that song starts with Kendrick saying, "All's my life I has to fight, all's my life I hard times like yeah, bad trips like yeah, Nazareth," which Nazareth is the city that Jesus was from, and I guess it was a little bit of a trashy place. I don't know if you could call any ancient city trashy, but it at least was not a great place to where people were doubting Jesus and writing Jesus off just from the fact that he was of Nazareth, right? That was a negative connotation. So when Kendrick kind of calls out the idea of Nazareth, we know how he feels about Compton and coming from Compton and the struggles of someone coming from Compton, and kind of making this comparison of Compton in inner city America to Nazareth and where Jesus came from. And this idea that even from these problematic places, you can have people rise up that can change the world and make a difference, and you shouldn't necessarily judge just by where people are from. But he says, "I'm fucked up, homie, you fucked up, but if God got us, then we gonna be all right," which then leads into the chorus by Pharrell saying, "We gonna be all right, we gonna be all right, we gonna be all right. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gonna be all right." And it keeps repeating over and over again. And Kendrick, over the course of this song, on this album, there's a period where Kendrick is very antagonistic, right? Wesley's Theory, For Free, King Kunta, Institutionalized, these walls are all Kendrick kind of in this negative place, from his early days in Compton to his initial rise in the rap game and feeling this ego and bravado, until You is this real breakdown where we see the weight of his choices and his success really making him feel guilty, really making him feel a sense of self-loathing, which then leads to this next stretch of songs from All Right, For Sale, Mama, Hood Politics, How Much a Dollar Costs, as Kendrick really starts to wrestle with the fact of what should he do with his fame? How can he be responsible to his home city and the people he grew up with? And how can he use his fame to do better than just indulgence and revenge and petty things? So All Right is this crucial song coming after how depressing You is, where Kendrick's finding some solace. And even though he continues on in this place of wrestling with himself, before you finally have some of the breakthroughs on The Blacker the Berry, You Ain't Gonna Lie, I, concluding with Mortal Man. All Right is this big tipping points in terms of Kendrick's energy. And it just so happens that in March of 2016 or 2015, Kanye tweeted, "Finally back in the studio." Man, he tweets that, and it wasn't until February of 2016 that we finally got the album. Yeah. But he said, "Finally back in the studio, starting my day by listening to Kendrick's new album!" Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. "Thank you for the music and messaging!" Exclamation, exclamation, exclamation. That's at 4:33 p.m. March 16th, 2015, at 6:02 p.m. So like an hour and a half later, which To Pimp a Butterfly is pretty long.
It's about
right?
that long, yeah.
Yeah. And Kanye tweets in all caps, "Kendrick is an inspiration. Thank you for the vibrations and the spirit. Your meaning, message, and execution are gifts to the world." So clearly it was him like, okay, I'm going to listen to this album. Yeah. Like, thanks, Kendrick. Yeah. To holy shit, this is amazing. Yeah. My God. And then we know that he had Kendrick on No More Parties in LA after that. But it just seemed Kanye was really moved by To Pimp a Butterfly. So it's not outrageous to me to think that he would listen to that album, understand what Kendrick's going for, and channel a song like All Right and borrow some of that language. And it's not we gonna be all right, but we gonna be okay. But we do know that he was using like Dear God, Make It All Right, only you can make it all right very early in the song. And then you pointed out separately when you were looking at the Sunday service choir version of this, there are stretches where, like, where was it? In the verse, Dear God, make it right, only you can make it right. Nothing else ever feels right. Okay, bow heads because it's all right, all right. Like, all right, just kind of surround us all, make it all right, forgive us all, make it all right. Like, make it all right was such a focus in the first version of this song that it just feels like Kanye's kind of channeling that idea, but instead of we go be all right, we gotta be okay. So it seems very inspired by the Kendrick song while changing the language a little bit to fit, you know, the soundscape of this, not be quite as direct, but you have what seems like indirect referencing to the idea of being all right. And then I can hear people at the same time saying like, we gotta be all right, such a generic phrase. And the idea of being all right or okay is so generic that maybe it's just coincidence, but maybe.
I don't know, but everything you were describing about all right and its place on the Pimp a Butterfly and how it is part of this journey of becoming less indulgent and more thoughtful of your community and what you represent, like, shit, that sounds like Kanye to me. That sounds like everything he's struggling with over the years and a big part of this album. So it's not too crazy to me that he would be channeling that.
Nope, not at all. And we do know that Kanye likes to base songs, albums, like clothing, everything off of other things. Like when he did the music video for Famous, it's based off of the Vincent Desiderio painting Sleep. When he does another music video, it's based off of this other thing. When he's just constantly like extrapolating from influences that he's had or art that he likes.
Right.
So
the Holy Mountain.
The Holy Mountain. I just don't think it's outrageous to think that he would extrapolate from All Right when he loved To Pimp a Butterfly. It
could go either way, you're right, but there's plenty of evidence that makes it seem like he could be doing that.
Yeah. And this idea of we gotta be okay relates back to God's Not Finished, which is the foundation of we gotta be okay, right? Like where we're at right now in our life is at the end point. Like God's not finished, like it's okay. Like you got this, things will improve.
I love this part with the organ, like it keeps like starting up and then like dying down. It's musically matching what's going on. Like you have to keep like saying God's not finished, like even when like the energy fades away and you feel lost and helpless, like God's not finished, you keep going.
Oh yeah, and there was that part through the middle. Was it like in the second or that chorus, like save me, make it all right, or even during the I know you're alive, God's not finished? At some point in there, the piano starts to come in, piano, right? Yeah. And you get that ascending piano that isn't identical to Come to Life, but seems to have a similar tone. Like it seems foreshadowing enough that you're kind of getting this like come to life foreshadowing.
I mean, yeah, you're getting a piano and a high register. Like that has not been Donda so far. Like Donda's been dark and murky and ambient and nothing like just a light melodic piano on its own.
Yeah, it's something where if it just happened during, I don't know, if it happened during Okay, I'd maybe be less inclined to make a connection.
Right.
But the idea that this is one of the main tipping point songs on the album, that it's nearly the halfway mark, it just feels like if you were going to do a foreshadow, this would be one of the places you do a foreshadow in just terms of basic narrative construction.
Yeah, especially if Come to Life, like the climactic sound on the album is going to have that piano like so front and center and like to completely dominate the soundscape, to have it just be a part of this song. And this song is that transition point, this build to that Come to Life sound. I mean, come on.
It makes me think of just like examples of foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Like in the movie Kick-Ass, I think it's around, it's not quite the 50% mark, but it's a decent amount ahead of the end. You just get a rocket launcher showing up. And then at one point, one of the villain's bodyguards or henchmen takes the rocket launcher. And then at the end of the movie, the rocket launcher gets used. And it's just like, yeah, that's kind of the triptych, right?
Yeah.
It's usually you foreshadow something either right at the beginning or at the 25%, 33%, 50%. Like, it's either at the quarters or the thirds. You do the foreshadows up to the climactic moment. So this just feels like the 50% mark for foreshadowing.
Right.
Okay. And then we end with the praise, like throw our hands up in the sky. Yes, Lord, we wave them high. Like we are praising, we're waiting, like we're ready for you to come and make it all right. Which then leads to remote control, where Kanye specifically talks about the fact of giving up control to God.
Ooh, I'm just sitting here bouncing in my chair, excited to talk about remote control.
Yeah, I've come a long way on remote control.
Man, 24 to remote control to Moon. This is the side of Kanye I didn't know I needed. Like I'm just so excited to talk about all this.
Well, and then you get that crescendo with Heaven and Hell.
Right. Oh, totally.
Like the fact that 24 has this building energy, but it doesn't quite have the payoff. The remote control also has this kind of slows things down a little bit. Moon is this beautiful like aside, and then you just have Heaven and Hell smacking you right in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. And I enjoy it every time.
Yes.
I say, please give me another.
Yes. Put our hands in the sky, ask for another.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else for this episode? We didn't quite go 24 hours.
No, but we did go further than 24 minutes.
It's about 2 hours and 24 minutes. Close. So, or 1 hour and 24 minutes.
Oh, God. I was going to say, was this a 2-hour episode? Okay.
I think we gave this song the attention it needed because it's not like a long song and it's not like there's a ton of lyrics or anything, but there is a lot to unpack.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Kanye albums to me. It's the intercontextuality, it's the context elements, and that's what makes the lyricism so fascinating. It's not as lyrically dense as your
Kendrick.
General, right? Like Kendrick or Black Thoughts or just like a Jay-Z doing like a triple entendre out of nowhere. But you go into like, what's that triple entendre really doing on that song? How's it relate to the album? It's clever, but is it deep?
Right.
And even if Kanye isn't having the most clever bars on his albums at this point, I think he's doing the most in terms of literary depth of any artist in music.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to say hip hop, but like him and Kendrick, I think, are the ones bringing the most literary depth to music at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you on that one. Just nodding my head.
Well, then join us next time for Remote Control.
Yeah. If you really enjoy us just praising the hell out of Kanye to no end, come back for the next episode because we do it on that one too.
And maybe by that point, we'll be calling him Ye all the time. Who knows?
All right. But until then, I am going to work on the Ye thing. But until then, I need everyone to keep it wavy.
Yeah. Stay loopy.
Loopy.